In 1348, the greatest catastrophe in human history occurred in London. In late 1348, the plague reaches London through the congested and filthy southern ports. Ships from Europe bring silk and spices, but also a silent, microscopic biological killer. Traders in the Pool of London observe abandoned ships drifting aimlessly with the cold tide. Foreign sailors are found dead at their oars, their bodies covered in dark, oozing sores. Port authorities fail to stop the entry of goods that carry the silent infected fleas. The Great Conduit, London's main water source, becomes surrounded by the first wave of dying. Merchants at the Guildhall realize that their wealth cannot buy protection from the rising tide. The royal court at Westminster retreats behind stone walls, isolating the king from the reality. Doctors advise the wealthy to flee, while the poor remain trapped in overcrowded slums. Fear replaces commerce as the primary exchange in the narrow streets near the silent docks. The buboes signify the internal hemorrhage of lymph nodes, leading to a very painful death. Within 3 days of the first symptoms, 80% of the infected will perish. The Church claims the pestilence is divine wrath for the growing decadence of London. Religious processions fill the streets, facilitating the transmission of the disease through the crowds. Authorities order the first quarantines, derived from the Italian word for 40 days of isolation. If one person is infected, the entire household is bolted inside by the city guards. A red cross is painted on the door, marking the family for physical death. Watchmen are paid to stand outside these houses to prevent anyone from escaping tonight. Inside, the healthy are forced to live among the dead until the fever arrives. Starvation often kills the residents before the plague even enters their weakened human bodies. London's legal system collapses as judges and lawyers perish or flee to the countryside. The great mortality creates a power vacuum that no royal decree can effectively fill. The smell of vinegar becomes constant, used to disinfect letters, coins, and basic food. Merchants refuse to touch money unless it has been submerged in jars of acidic liquid. The floorboards of London's houses are covered in fresh straw that hides filth. Domestic animals like dogs and cats are slaughtered, wrongly blamed for spreading the killer. Without predators, the black rat population explodes, carrying the infected fleas into every home. The sound of church bells is eventually banned to prevent a total psychological collapse. St. Paul's Cathedral becomes a silent monument in a city that has lost its voice. Before this terror, London was a thriving centre of global commerce and royal power. The markets were loud with the shouts of merchants selling fine wool and golden grains. Large ships from distant lands brought luxury silks and expensive spices to the crowded docks. The streets were once filled with the sound of laughter and the smell of roasting meats. Stone churches were monuments of hope, filled with golden light and constant morning prayers. Neighbours shared bread and wine in the taverns, planning for a long and prosperous future. London Bridge was a crown of shops and houses pulsating with the energy of life. The legal system maintained order, and the king's peace was felt in every busy parish. It was a city of stone, wood, and gold, believing itself to be completely invincible. This beautiful world was the zenith of medieval achievement before the monster arrived in silence. London's streets were never designed for hygiene. Waste and sewage flow into open gutters. The Gare-de-Lou custom means human waste is constantly dumped into the paths of pedestrians. This lack of sanitation creates the perfect breeding ground for the Yersinia pestis bacteria. As death tolls rise, the brotherhood of the flagellants arrives from the distant German lands. These groups of fanatics believe that physical penance is the only way to appease God. They march in circles, whipping their own backs with iron-tipped scourges 3 times a day. Their blood spatters onto the onlookers, who believe the fluid holds miraculous healing powers. Fear leads to the persecution of marginalized groups, falsely accused of poisoning the city wells. Violence erupts in the slums as people look for a tangible enemy to blame. The plague doctor emerges as a specialized but often ineffective figure of this era. His leather suit is a medieval version of a biohazard suit, waxed to repel fluids. The iconic bird mask is designed to hold flowers like lavender to filter air. He uses a wooden pointer to examine patients from a distance, avoiding all physical contact. Most doctors are not university trained. They are empirics looking to profit from the tragedy. They charge high fees for useless recipes containing ground emeralds or powdered unicorn horn. The red glass eyes of their masks provide a terrifying visual for the dying population. The average lifespan during the outbreak drops to less than 20 years in urban centers. In the streets, the rakers are hired to remove the increasing number of corpses. These men are often prisoners or the desperate, willing to risk death for high wages. They use long hooks to drag bodies out of houses to avoid touching the skin. The concept of the danse macabre begins to appear in art and the local psyche. It represents the idea that death is the great equalizer, claiming both kings and peasants. Schools close as teachers die, and the Latin language begins to lose its dominance. English becomes more common in official records because the Latin-speaking elite has been decimated. Every street corner is filled with abandoned carts and the remains of dead horses. The city's infrastructure fails as the workers responsible for maintenance vanish from the record. Neighbors who once shared bread now watch each other through cracks in their shutters. Trust is a luxury that Londoners can no longer afford during the Great Mortality. The market square, once the heart of the economy, is now a silent, empty space. Trade stops completely as the rural areas refuse to send food to the plague city. Famine begins to kill those whom the bacteria has not yet reached in the slums. The price of basic wheat skyrockets, while the value of luxury goods and gold plummets. Inheritance disputes become constant as entire lineages are wiped out in a single week. The bills of mortality are created to keep track of the staggering number of deaths. These documents reveal that in some parishes, 60% of the population has disappeared. The traditional burial grounds are full, and the soil can no longer take more bodies. Authorities are forced to bypass the law and purchase land for mass burial pits. The Charterhouse pit becomes one of the largest, holding thousands of stacked, nameless corpses. Bodies are layered like lasagna, separated by thin layers of dirt and burning lime. Quicklime is used to accelerate the decomposition and reduce the evil smells of rot. The death cart becomes the most recognizable sound of the London night today. The bell rings not for prayer, but to alert families to bring out their dead. Many people die alone in their beds, their bodies discovered only by the smell. Theft of the dead becomes common as clothes are stripped from bodies for resale. This practice further spreads the infected fleas to the unsuspecting buyers in other districts. The concept of a Christian burial is abandoned as priests refuse to perform last rites. The Bishop of London grants permission for people to confess their sins to each other. This religious shift begins to undermine the absolute power of the Catholic Church's hierarchy. Labourers who survive begin to realise their worth as the labour force shrinks drastically. The feudal system begins to crack as peasants demand wages instead of forced labour. King Edward III attempts to freeze wages with the Statute of Labourers, but it fails. The economic foundations of the Middle Ages are being destroyed by a microscopic organism. Massive bonfires are lit at every crossroads to purify the corrupted air of London. The heat from these fires only adds to the misery of the summer heat wave. Smoke fills the lungs of the survivors, causing respiratory issues that mimic the plague. The Tower of London is reinforced, but the virus enters even the royal chambers. Members of the court are found dead in their silk robes, abandoned by servants. The Thames River becomes a conveyor belt for floating waste and discarded infected clothing. London is no longer a city of commerce, but a giant, open-air morgue. Moral constraints vanish as people realize that tomorrow is no longer a certainty for anyone. Some choose to spend their final hours in hedonism, drinking and looting empty mansions. Others lock themselves in churches, dying of dehydration while praying for a miracle. The most tragic aspect is the abandonment of children by their own terrified parents. Chroniclers record stories of fathers fleeing the city and leaving their infected families behind. This breakdown of the basic family unit is the ultimate sign of social collapse. Crime becomes a way of life for the immune, those who survived the first wave. Gangs of looters move through the abandoned wealthy districts of Westminster and Cheapside. They steal jewellery from the dead, often becoming infected themselves within a few days. The streets are littered with the belongings of those who tried to flee but failed. Carts with broken wheels and spilled trunks are common sights on the roads out. On London Bridge, houses are burned to create a firebreak against the spreading miasma. The fire also serves to destroy the nests of rats living in the bridge's structures. The heat is so intense that the stone of the bridge begins to crack. Survivors who make it to the city gates are often met with arrows from guards. Nearby villages form cordons sanitaires to prevent Londoners from entering their healthy lands. This creates a no-man's land outside the walls, where thousands die in mud. The water supply from the Great Conduit is believed to be tainted by death. People turn to ale and wine, further dehydrating their already feverish and weakened bodies. The apothecaries' shops are stripped of all herbs, leaving only dust on the shelves. Rumours of remedies, including drinking molten gold, circulate among the desperate wealthy elite. The psychological trauma creates a generation of people obsessed with the imagery of death. Every cough in a public space triggers a wave of panic and immediate violence. Mothers carry dead infants wrapped in rags, refusing to believe they are truly gone. The rakers eventually stop counting and simply throw bodies into any available hole. The smell of lime and rotting flesh defines the London of 1348 for decades. Even the crows and vultures become sick from feeding on the infected human remains. The Great Mortality is not just a disease, it is a total cultural reset. The feudal ladder is kicked over, and the middle class begins its slow birth. But for now, there is only the sound of the wind and the carts. Unharvested crops rot in the fields because there are no workers left to reap. Cattle wander aimlessly, dying of neglect and contributing to the overall sense of doom. Back in London, the fire on the bridge begins to die down into ash. The sky is a permanent shade of grey from the constant smoke of the pits. 1/3 of the population of the known world has perished in 18 months. Some estimates suggest that 50 million people have been killed by the Yersinia bacteria. The survivors are left with a world that has too much land and too few people. This demographic shift will eventually lead to the end of serfdom in England. The Great Mortality has changed the genetic makeup of the European population forever. Those who survived may have a specific genetic resistance that they pass on. The first wave finally begins to recede as the cold winter weather arrives. The fleas become dormant, and the rate of infection slows down for a few months. But the plague is not gone. It will return every few years for centuries. Londoners emerge from their homes looking at a city they no longer recognize. Every family has lost someone. Every street has a house that is now empty. The memento mori philosophy becomes the dominant cultural force in the aftermath. The Great Mortality of 1348 is the most lethal event in human history. It destroyed an old world and forced the creation of a new, modern one. The River Thames flows on, a silent witness to the tragedy of the Black Death. Survival was not a matter of virtue, but a matter of pure, terrifying chance.